wonder why the person who ran away from love ends up being the one who can't stop looking back? Let me break the illusion right here, right now. You see, the avoidant didn't reject the anxious because they didn't care. They rejected them. Avoidants don't reject love because they don't feel anything. Let's rip that lie apart right now. They feel. Oh, they feel deeply. But what they fear isn't love. It's the terrifying exposure that comes with it. Vulnerability is the real monster under their bed. You show them honesty, devotion, presence, and their nervous system screams, run, because that level of intimacy doesn't just invite closeness. It's demands a surrender they've never practiced. You bring them real emotional connection, and what happens? Their defenses flare up like sirens, not because you're wrong, not because your love is broken, but because to an avoidant, closeness feels like danger. It's the psychological equivalent of standing at the edge of a cliff with no harness. Their instincts say, back away, shut down, disconnect, not because there's no love, but because love threatens the safety of their emotional armor. You need to understand how deep this wiring goes. Avoidants are often shaped by early emotional environments where expressing needs wasn't safe, where being vulnerable didn't earn love, it earned disappointment. So now vulnerability feels like walking into a battlefield unarmed. When someone like you, consistent, open-hearted, emotionally engaged, comes into their life, you don't feel like a gift at first. You feel like a threat to their control, a threat to their emotional numbness, a threat to their perfectly crafted illusion of independence. You're the storm they pretend they don't see coming. So they push you away, coldly, quietly, passive-aggressively. They downplay your importance, rewrite your value, pretend they don't care. But all they're doing is retreating from the one thing they actually crave, real, raw human connection. What happens next is where the cycle explodes. You, the anxious, loving, present one, try harder. You reach out more. You pour in more love, hoping it'll break through their walls, but every drop of love you offer becomes a weight on their chest. Why? Because now they feel seen, not in the romantic movie way. No, they feel emotionally naked, exposed. And it's unbearable for someone who's lived their life behind walls. Your love doesn't fall on deaf ears. It hits too hard. It cuts through their numbness. It triggers everything they've been trying to suppress. And the reaction isn't gratitude, it's panic. And here's the wild part. They don't even know they're doing it. Their detachment isn't calculated, it's reflex. When they pull back, they tell themselves lies to justify it. I'm just not ready. They're too intense. I need space. But deep down, something else is happening. They're choking on a love that's asking them to confront the parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. They're terrified you'll see how fragile they really are beneath the calm exterior, that you'll see their fears, their shame, their insecurity, so they armor up, they distance, they ghost, because it's easier to reject you than to face themselves. But let me tell you something brutal and beautiful. They don't forget you. No matter how they acted, no matter how emotionless they looked, you are not forgettable. They remember the way you made them feel, not just loved, but real. You reminded them they were human. And when you're avoidant, that reminder haunts you, because once you taste real intimacy, even if you run from it, nothing else feels the same again. They'll try to replace you with distractions, with flings, with people who don't challenge them emotionally, but it's never the same. Why? Because those people don't require them to feel anything uncomfortable. They don't demand growth. They don't mirror the truth. They're easy, and easy gets old fast. What they don't tell you is how late it hits them. After the silence, after the distance, after they've convinced themselves they're better off. That's when it creeps in. That heavy, inescapable feeling. I pushed away the one person who actually saw me. And by then, it's too late. You've grown, you've healed, you've risen. You're no longer chasing the emotional breadcrumbs they used to throw at you. And that's what wrecks them. Because avoidants don't fear being alone. They fear being alone after realizing they let something real die. So listen closely. If you're the one who loved them, really loved them, and they rejected it, please stop questioning your worth. You weren't too much. You were more than their nervous system could handle. You were clinging. You were consistent. You were dramatic. You were expressive. You were broken. You were brave enough to show up emotionally when they couldn't even show up for themselves. That's power. That's courage. That's something they'll spend years trying to find again, and probably never will. And if you're the avoidant, if this is making your chest tighten, if this speech makes you uncomfortable, good. That's growth knocking. That's the truth hitting you where you've tried to stay numb. You don't get many chances in life to be fully seen and fully loved. And when it shows up in front of you in the form of someone real, someone raw, someone consistent, don't run. Don't wait for distance to teach you what presence could have given you. Because no one is afraid of love. They're afraid of what love asks of them. And for the avoidant, love doesn't ask. It demands vulnerability. And that's what they were really running from all along. They told you that you were too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too intense. And you believed it. Because the person you gave everything to, your love, your heart, your soul, looked you in the eye and couldn't handle it. They didn't say thank you. They didn't say I'm scared. They said things like, you're suffocating me. I need space. I don't know what I want. And in that moment, their confusion became your shame. But let me shake you out of that lie right now. You weren't too much. You were just too real for someone who spent their whole life trying to avoid reality. Understand this. When you love with your full self, when you show up emotionally available, present, attuned, it creates an emotional intensity most people have never experienced before. And for someone avoidant, that intensity feels like pressure. But it's not pressure to run, it's pressure to grow. And growth is terrifying to someone who's been hiding in survival mode. You showed them a love that asked nothing less than the full truth, the real them. Not the mask, not the distant version, not the cool, composed illusion, but the raw, exposed, vulnerable them. And they weren't ready, not even close. They wanted the benefits of love without the responsibility. They wanted to be held without being known. And you knew them. You read them. You cracked the code. You saw behind the emotional armor they wore so well. And in doing so, you touched a nerve they didn't know they had. You see, people who run from connection don't hate love. They hate exposure. Love is a mirror, and you were holding it right in front of them. You reflected everything they didn't want to see, their fear, their emotional immaturity, their deep-seated belief that they're unlovable. You made them feel things they'd spent years burying under, I'm fine, and I don't need anyone. Your presence wasn't overwhelming. It was confronting. You made them feel alive in ways that scared the hell out of them, because aliveness means vulnerability, and vulnerability to them felt like death. You weren't too much. You were the truth in a world they were trying desperately to escape. They called you needy when what you really were was emotionally available. They said you were intense when what you were was fully present. You didn't play games. You didn't withhold affection. You didn't punish them for being flawed. You offered consistent love, deep care, open communication. And that kind of love doesn't feel like love to someone who never received it in a safe way. It feels foreign, something threatening. That's the paradox. You were giving them everything they always wanted, and it triggered everything they were afraid to feel. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. They admired you for it. Deep down, beneath the fear, they knew you were strong. Because only someone who has done their emotional work can love like that. Only someone with courage can show up without needing to control the outcome. You walked into the room with your heart open. You asked to be met, not idolized. You didn't want perfect. You wanted present. But when someone has spent their whole life learning to disappear emotionally, they don't know how to meet presence with presence. They meet it with distance, silence, criticism, withdrawal. Not because you were too much, but because they were never taught how to hold something that real without dropping it. And yet they'll go out into the world and seek something easier, someone more low key, someone who doesn't trigger their fear. And for a while, they'll convince themselves they made the right choice, that you're not what they needed, that it was just bad timing. But give it time, because eventually the silence in their new connection will start to feel like a void. The lack of depth will taste like emptiness. And they'll remember you, not the fights, not the but the feeling of being seen, of being understood, of being loved without having to perform. They'll miss the way you checked in. The way you stayed up late listening to the things they never said to anyone else. The way you held space for their fear without demanding perfection. And they'll realize something devastating. They weren't rejecting neediness, they were rejecting nurture. because they didn't know how to receive without feeling weak. They didn't know how to be cared for without feeling controlled. And that's not your fault. That's their wound. That's their work. But they'll carry the imprint of you long after you've healed from the imprint of them. So don't let their fear become your identity. Don't let their avoidance make you shrink yourself. You were never too much. You were just more than they were willing to hold. And you know what? That's okay. Because your love wasn't meant to be contained. It was meant to be met, matched, respected, revered. The right person won't call you overwhelming. They'll call you a miracle. They won't need space to recover from your affection. They'll need time to catch their breath from how lucky they feel to be seen by someone like you. So stop rewriting yourself to fit inside smaller stories. Stop second-guessing the way you love just because someone with an underdeveloped emotional vocabulary couldn't speak your language. You don't have to become less emotional. You just have to become more discerning. Your love is not a burden. Your presence is not a problem. Your truth is not too intense. It's medicine. It's a wake-up call. And while some people will run from it, others, the right ones, will rise to meet it with fire in their chest and clarity in their eyes. And when that happens, when you finally meet someone who says, "Thank you for loving like that. I've been looking for it my whole life," you'll realize that every moment you thought you were too much was just a moment you were giving love to someone too afraid to receive it. They always said they didn't want anything serious, that they weren't ready, that they weren't sure about love, about connection, about labels. And so they let you go. They walked away like it was nothing, cold, calm, distant, like your love never touched them. And you sat there trying to convince yourself they were right, that maybe you were the problem, that maybe they really didn't care, that maybe they just forgot. But let me shake your soul for a second. They didn't forget a damn thing. They remember every word, every late night message, every time you held space for their chaos. They remember the feeling of being understood, not just accepted, but seen. And now that it's gone, now that you're silent, that's when it hits them like a truck. Because avoidants don't process loss in the moment. They run from it. But the ghost of you, that shows up later and it never leaves. And see, when you left, it didn't register as pain right away. For someone avoidant, the breakup isn't where the pain starts. It's where they feel relief. Not because they didn't love you, but because the emotional intensity is over. They don't have to face themselves anymore. They don't have to be vulnerable. They don't have to answer hard questions like, why does intimacy make me panic? So in the beginning, they feel free, light, like they've escaped something. But that's an illusion, because what they've really escaped is accountability, connection, growth, you. And you feel every ounce of the loss in real time. While they're out pretending it never happened, you're picking up the emotional debris they left behind. You're feeling everything they're avoiding. But it flips. Oh, it flips hard. Because avoidants aren't immune to emotions. They're just delayed. And by the time they feel what you felt, it's too late. They start checking your stories, scrolling through old photos, wondering if you're seeing someone new. They don't reach out, of course, not yet. That would mean admitting something real, and they're not ready for that level of honesty. But the thoughts haunt them. They wonder if someone else gets to hear your laugh now, if someone else gets to hold the space they never knew how to protect. They miss the way you cared about details no one else noticed, the way you were always 2 steps ahead emotionally, the way you knew what they were feeling before they even said a word. They'll never admit it out loud, but deep down they know you were rare. They know they won't find that kind of love again. Not in the people they run to, not in the distractions, not in the silence. And that realization starts to eat at them, one quiet moment at a time. They thought they wanted easy, low pressure, simple, someone who wouldn't ask for emotional depth, and they might find that for a while, a shallow replacement, someone who doesn't question the walls, someone who lets them coast through connection without effort. But then the contrast sets in. Because now they're in a connection that doesn't challenge them, that doesn't mirror anything real, that doesn't ask them to show up as more than just fine. And the truth comes crashing in. They didn't just lose a partner. They lost a mirror that showed them their wounds, their shadows, their truth. And even though that mirror was painful, it was honest. And now they're surrounded by people who only see the surface. And the surface doesn't feed the soul. It doesn't matter how long it takes, weeks, months, years. Avoidants always circle back mentally. They replay the moments they dismissed, the times you asked them to open up and they shut down instead, the times you cried, not because you were weak, but because you cared so deeply it hurt. The way you always came back after conflict, the way you never gave up on them even when they gave up on themselves. And here's what will burn them the most. You're not coming back. Not because you don't love them anymore, but because you finally learned to love yourself more. Because you realize that love without emotional safety isn't love. It's self-abandonment. And you're done abandoning yourself for someone who made you feel like your emotions were liabilities. They will regret it. Quietly, repeatedly. They'll try to numb it, ignore it, replace it. But no matter how hard they try to forget, they'll always remember how it felt to be loved by you. That's what they miss. Not just your presence, but the feeling of emotional oxygen you brought into their life. You made it safe for them to feel. And now that safety is gone. Not because you were taken from them, but because they let you go. Because fear won. And now, even if they wanted to come back, they know the version of you that waited is gone. This is what no one teaches avoidance. When you keep rejecting love, love stops showing up. When you keep running from intimacy, one day it stops chasing. You taught them what love could look like, and they taught you what fear does when it's given too much power. They weren't heartless. They were scared. But fear isn't an excuse. And love that's rejected over and over turns into silence, not because you didn't care anymore, but because they didn't. At least not loud enough, not clear enough, not consistently enough, and the window closed. They miss you because they can't recreate you. Because your love wasn't performative. It was real, raw, present, messy, yes, but human. You weren't afraid to feel, to confront, to stay. And they thought that made you weak. Until they realized they've been living as a ghost in their own life. Detached, numb, disconnected. And you were the one thing that made them feel alive. The one person who didn't just love them, but believed in them. And now, that version of them only existed in your presence. Without you, they don't just miss the relationship. They miss the version of themselves they were becoming with you by their side. So when you find yourself wondering if they cared, yes, they did. But not enough to face themselves. Not enough to fight through the fear. Not enough to stay. And now that absence is louder than any goodbye. That silence is a storm they can't outrun. Because when they said you were too much, what they really meant was you made me feel things I didn't know how to deal with. And now that you're gone, they finally understand what it means to lose something irreplaceable. They thought they were the strong one for walking away. They thought detachment was control, that being distant made them powerful, that silence was a shield and coldness was clarity. But what they didn't see, what they still don't fully understand, is that the real strength was in you, in the way you stayed, in the way you loved without holding back, in the way you opened your heart to someone who could barely open their mouth to say how they really felt. You showed up in full color while they were still hiding in grayscale, and they mistook your depth for drama, your passion for pressure, your consistency for clinginess. But now that you're gone, truly gone, what once felt like control is collapsing into a kind of chaos they can't even name. Because they didn't just lose you, they lost the version of themselves that only ever surfaced around your love. When you first walked away, they didn't chase you. And you took that silence as confirmation that they didn't care. But they did. They cared deeply. They just didn't have the tools to admit it. Not to you, not to themselves. Because to admit they cared would mean facing the truth of what they destroyed. The guilt, the shame, the cowardice. So instead, they sat in denial, wrapped in ego, telling themselves stories to make it all make sense. It was too much. It wasn't the right time. I need to find myself. And yet, behind closed doors, the stories don't soothe anymore. Because when you love someone real and push them away, there's no peace in the quiet. There's just echo. Echo of your voice, your laughter, your words, your presence. And it never stops. They see you changing, evolving, glowing, healing, and it hurts. It hurts because the version of you they once had, the one who would have taken them back in a second, is gone. And they know it. They feel it. The power dynamic has flipped, and it's not about games. It's about growth. You're no longer the anxious chaser hoping they'll choose you. You're the healed one who finally realized your love deserves a place. It doesn't have to beg to belong. That kind of shift, it rattles them to their core. Because when they were in control, they thought they could come back whenever they wanted. They thought they had time. They thought you'd always be waiting in the wings. But healing changes the script. And now the door isn't just closed, it's locked, and it's quiet on the other side. What's breaking them now isn't just the memory of you, it's the realization that they were seen, loved, and accepted in a way that might never come again. They took it for granted because they didn't know that kind of connection was rare. They thought they could replace it, find it somewhere else, somewhere safer, easier. But now they see what they had wasn't pressure, it was a privilege to be known that deeply, to be loved that completely. And they threw it away. Not because it was wrong, but because it was real. And real love always exposes the parts of us we're trying to avoid. You were the only one who challenged them to grow. You didn't let them hide. You asked for truth. You asked for presence. You asked for more. Not because you were demanding, but because you believed in them. You saw who they could become, not just who they were pretending to be. And that scared them. Because to rise to the level of your love, they would have had to face their pain, their patterns, their past. And they weren't ready. So instead of rising, they ran. And now they're stuck with the truth. They didn't lose you because you were too much. They lost you because they refused to become enough. They remember how safe it felt to fall apart around you, how your presence didn't judge, how your love didn't flinch at their mess. They remember the way you stayed soft even when you were hurting, how you tried to understand even when you were misunderstood. And that memory, that haunts them. Because no one else is doing that now. Everyone else sees the version they project, not the one underneath. And even if they pretend they're fine, even if they act like life is moving on, deep inside they know they messed up something divine. They were loved in a way most people only pray for. And they let it rot in the dark because they didn't have the courage to confront themselves. But here's the twist that breaks their pride completely. You didn't just move on. You leveled up. Emotionally, spiritually, mentally. You became the version of yourself they never believed you could become without them. And now, they're stuck in the same loops, dating the same emotionally empty people, repeating the same avoidant patterns, watching you from the sidelines, wondering how you became so powerful after all the ways they made you feel small. And that realization cuts deeper than any rejection they ever gave you, because it proves what they were too blind to see. You were never the weak one. You were the warrior, the heart-led fighter who dared to love with no mask and no filter in a world terrified of truth. And now you're gone. Not just physically, but emotionally, energetically. You no longer orbit around their inconsistency. You've reclaimed your time, your peace, your power. And while they sit in silence, missing what they couldn't hold, you're out there becoming everything they thought you'd need them to be. And that's the part that breaks them the most. Because they thought they were your source. But the truth, you were your own source all along. They were just too emotionally bankrupt to recognize the kind of abundance you were offering. So let them miss you. Let them sit in the silence they created. Let them scroll through your feed with that hollow feeling in their chest. Let them wrestle with the truth of what they lost. Not because you're vengeful. Not because you want them to hurt. But because that's what growth does. It leaves behind those who chose comfort over courage, fear over love, ego over evolution. And when the avoidant finally realizes that the person they once dismissed became the person they now desperately wish they could return to, that's the cost of avoidance.